In one South Korean prison, the inmates were having a slap battle as a way to pass the time and prove who the strongest prisoner was. One of the prisoners, who was skinnier than the others, volunteered to take part in the competition. Everything went well at first, until that young guy cheated. Because of his cheating, the whole prison became chaotic and messed up. This was Jo Hyun-soo, the newly arrived inmate of the prison. He deliberately cheated in order to get the attention of other prisoners. Because of what he did, he became the target of the other prisoners. Luckily, he is someone who is agile and good at fighting, so he can avoid every attack easily and make a counterattack on the person who beat him. However, the fight didn't last long, as they were dismissed by prison guards. Up next, we meet Han Jae-ho, a mafia boss in South Korea, who is also serving time in prison. He is impressed and amazed by Hyun-soo's stunts. Inside the prison, Jae-ho controls the circulation of weed cigarettes, and he has a good relationship with several prison officers whom he bribes for the smooth running of his business. Jae-ho has many underlings who are also inside the prison, and many prisoners are afraid of him. While in prison, Jae-ho had many conveniences. Even the kitchen in the prison was where his henchmen produced cigarettes and weed, which were then sold to other prisoners. One day, another mafia boss named Kim Sung-hin and some of his minions arrived at the prison as well. As Sung-hin entered the prison, Jae-ho's reign in the prison would be replaced by his. When Sung-hin and his henchmen arrived, everyone bowed their heads and even made way as a form of respect for him. Sung-hin would later control drug trafficking in the prison, and the kitchen that was previously used by Jae-ho's boys, from then on would be used by his boys. Jae-ho planned to negotiate his cigarette and weed business with Sung-hin, and in return, he would share 50% of the profit. However, Sung-hin turned him down. Following his refusal, Jae-ho then declared war on Sung-hin. A short while later, Jae-ho received the news that his men had been brought by officers at the prison. He then immediately went to the office to take care of it. As it turned out, the reason his men were detained by the prison officers was because Sung-hin had given them more money than Jae-ho. Therefore, since then, Jae-ho has not been able to do whatever he used to do. Jae-ho protested to the officers because he could not accept their way of treating him, but in the end, the prison officers beat him up and took him to the isolation room. With Jae-ho's confinement, Sung-hin became the sole leader of the inmates, replacing Jae-ho's position. Shortly after leaving the isolation room, Jae-ho crossed paths with Hyun-soo, and Hyun-soo happened to see one of Sung-hin's men behind Jae-ho while carrying a knife and walking towards Jae-ho. Hyun-soo tried to help Jae-ho by stopping the man's attack. A few moments later, Hyun-soo came to Jae-ho's cell. Jae-ho gave Hyun-soo a cigarette as a reward for saving his life. Hyun-soo then gave him some ideas so that Jae-ho could get special facilities in prison again. They later visited the prison warden's office to show some photos on Jae-ho's cell phone. The photos were of Jae-ho himself having fun with cigarettes and weed. So the point is, they threatened the head warden to give Jae-ho special permission in prison, otherwise Hyun-soo would publish the photo of Jae-ho with the authorities. Because of this threat, the warden was forced to side with Jae-ho. Jae-ho held Sung-hin in the kitchen, and he then poured hot oil on Sung-hin's body, blistering his skin. Jae-ho then asked about the reason why Sung-hin wanted to kill him. Sung-hin then explained that he had been ordered by Jae-ho's boss, Go Byung-chul, to kill him. In return, Byung-chul had promised to give him 30% of his business profits if he and his crew succeeded in killing Jae-ho. Jae-ho couldn't believe Sung-hin's words. He then poured more hot oil on Sung-hin's head, and he was later killed. Go Byung-chul is Jae-ho's boss. He owns a fish import business from Russia. The fish business is simply a cover for the fact that Byung-chul is actually running a drug business. He got the illicit goods from Russia by smuggling them using fish boxes. Byung-chul's business is still running and continues to be monitored by the police. Following Sung-hin's death, Jae-ho returned to rule the prison, and this time, he started by getting rid of all of Sung-hin's underlings. One day, Hyun-soo offered to become a member of Jae-ho's gang once he got out of prison, but Jae-ho did not respond to Hyun-soo's request. Hyun-soo and Jae-ho's friendship grew closer, and before he knew it, his 2 years in prison were finally over. He only had to wait for his last year so he could get out of there. One day, Hyunsu received a message that his mother had died in a car accident. He then asked for permission to get out of prison for just one day to see his mother for the last time, but he was saddened that his request was denied, and there was nothing he could do but go against the prison officers because of his deep sadness. Jae-ho tried to calm him down, but his anger was uncontrollable. The next day, Hyunsu was shocked to find that he had gotten a letter of permission to get out of prison. However, it turned out that it wasn't from the police, but was thanks to Jae-ho, who bribed the officer. Hyunsu finally got out of prison and saw his deceased mother for the last time. When he returned to the prison, Jae-ho and his henchmen welcomed Hyunsu. Afterward, Jae-ho and Kensu had a private conversation. Jae-ho then asked about Hyunsu's wish that he would join Jae-ho's gang once he was released from prison, and out of the blue, Hyunsu said something that made Jae-ho both shocked and in disbelief. "Bro, I'm a cop," Hyunsu said. Of course, Jae-ho didn't believe that Hyunsu was a cop, but Hyunsu then convinced him that he was an undercover cop. Let's flash back to some time before. The police have long suspected Go Byung-chul's imported fish business. They knew that the business had been used to cover up drug trafficking. Since the police didn't have enough evidence to arrest Byung-chul and didn't want to jeopardize relations between Korea and Russia, they planned to put one of their officers in jail to keep an eye on Jae-ho so that they could get information about Byung-chul's next business plan. By doing so, the police hoped they would have enough evidence. The undercover mission was then assigned to Jo Hyunsu. Hyunsu would be in prison for 3 years for the sake of their mission. Hyunsu initially refused the task because his mother, who suffers from kidney disease, lives alone in her house. However, with a promise from his boss, Chun In-suk, who would find a kidney donor for his mother and cover all of her surgery costs, Hyunsu finally accepted it. They then set up a scenario so that Hyunsu could make Jae-ho believe in him. However, Hyunsu was somewhat disappointed with his boss, as it turned out that she was the one who didn't give him the approval to see his mother. Hyunsu was touched by Jae-ho's kindness for bribing the prison officer so that he could see his mother for the last time. His kindness ultimately made Hyunsu trust him more than his colleagues in the police. All of that made Hyunsu admit who he really was to Jae-ho. Following Hyunsu's confession, Jae-ho was convinced that he should take Hyunsu to join his gang. Long story short, Jae-ho was finally released from prison, and on the day of his release, one of Byung-chul's underlings, Go Byung-gap, came to see him. Jae-ho then told him all the stories that happened while he was in prison. Byung-gap is the third in command of the mafia. So the order of this mafia group is, first is Go Byung-chul, second is Han Jae-ho, and third is Go Byung-gap, who happens to be Byung-chul's cousin. After hearing Jae-ho's story, especially about Jae-ho's intention to recruit Hyunsu into their gang, Byung-gap expressed his objection. He said how could they hire a cop for their illegal business? However, Jae-ho assured Byung-gap that Hyunsu was such a good boy that he wouldn't betray him. 3 years had passed, and Hyunsu's day of release had finally arrived. On the day of his release, Jae-ho and his entourage welcomed him with a luxury car convoy. Jae-ho then invited him to dinner with the rest of the gang. Hyunsu then enjoyed his freedom from prison by doing all the things he loved. In the meantime, Go Byung-chul still couldn't believe that Kim Sung-in had died of a heart attack. Sung-in's death thwarted his plan to kill Jae-ho. Byung-chul's purpose in wanting to kill Jae-ho was because, according to him, Jae-ho endangered his position as the big boss of his gang and also his business. Byung-gap then convinced Byung-chul that it was true that Sung-in died of a heart attack, but before he knew it, he had fallen for Jae-ho's lies. One day, Hyunsu was held captive by some people while he was visiting his mother's grave. Hyunsu was then taken somewhere. Those who captured him then asked him about Jae-ho. Hyunsu was beaten and doused with gasoline. Apparently, those who tortured him were his boss, In-suk, and his colleagues from the police. In-suk told him that this was just a test, and he then said that she already knew that Go Byung-chul was making plans to deal in a new variant of drugs. At that moment, Hyunsu asked In-suk about the person who had hit his mother, but In-suk said that his mother's case had not been solved yet and was still under investigation. Following that, Hyunsu wondered how his team at the police department could find out where he was and know all of his gang's plans. Hyunsu finally realized that all this time he had been spied on by Insuk, who had installed a bugging device in his watch. Hyunsu then destroyed his watch when he was assigned to finish off one of Byung-chul's partners who had committed fraud on him. After successfully destroying the fraudster, Hyunsu managed to become Byung-chul's confidant, as he was very impressed with Hyunsu's abilities. The other night, Jae-ho and Hyunsu visited a nightclub to meet Mr. Jagard. He was a representative from Russia who was in charge of the drug business with Byung-chul. While Jae-ho was discussing business with Jagard, Hyunsu left the club, and outside he met one of his police peers. The fellow then handed Hyunsu a new watch so that the police could track and know the plans of Hyunsu and the other mafia members. Out of the blue, Jae-ho arrived, and Hyunsu then landed a punch on his partner so that Jae-ho would not be suspicious of him. Jae-ho then proceeded to beat up the cop, but luckily Hyunsu managed to convince Jae-ho to stop hurting the poor guy. Jae-ho and Hyunsu then went back into the club, and when they had just entered the elevator, Jae-ho checked Hyunsu's entire body, but he found nothing. Jae-ho suspected that Hyunsu was again fitted with a tracking device by his police friends. Hyunsu then told him that his friend had brought him a new watch earlier, but he didn't take it. Jae-ho took Hyunsu somewhere, and there they talked about many things, including Jae-ho being betrayed by Byung-chul, even though he had worked for Byung-chul for 20 years. It's what made him no longer able to trust other people. Hyunsu then said that he wouldn't push Jae-ho to trust him, but one thing was for sure, he would always trust Jae-ho. The next day, Hyunsu gave Insuk information about the location of the drug transaction. Reportedly, the transaction would take place on a ship, and it was a big transaction with a total of 50 kilograms of drugs. Based on Hyunsu's information, the police immediately conducted an ambush, but instead of drugs, they found a bunch of toys. The police mission to catch the drug kingpin finally failed again because they did not find any solid evidence. Meanwhile, in the middle of the sea, Hyunsu was on board a small boat. It was on this boat that the real transaction took place. The previous transaction was just a trick to fool the police so that the real drug deal could go through. The bags of drugs then surfaced in the sea thanks to the saline solution they used. This plan of using saline to hide the drugs in the sea was designed by Hyunsu himself. Hyunsu decided to betray his police colleagues because of his disappointment in his friends who did not take good care of his mother, and up until now, the police have also not been able to solve the case of his mother's death. After checking all the bags of drugs they received, Byung-chul then made a toast to celebrate his success. Little did he know that Jae-ho was plotting to kill him. Jae-ho ended up killing Byung-chul. Byung-gap then declared his support for Jae-ho, and from then on, he became Jae-ho's henchman. Jae-ho also killed all of Byung-chul's followers, and he is now the leader of the entire gang, replacing Byung-chul. The next day, Hyunsu asked Jae-ho to shoot him before he returned to the police station to make his mission report. After his gunshot wound was treated, Hyunsu went to Insuk. Insuk already knew that Hyunsu had betrayed the police. Insuk then showed the CCTV video footage of the day Hyunsu's mother died. Hyunsu was shocked and devastated when he found out that the person who had hit his mother was Jae-ho. We flash back to Jae-ho and Hyunsu's time in prison. While in prison, Byung-gap often met Jae-ho to investigate Sung-hin's death. To cover up the fact that he was the one who had killed Sung-hin, Jae-ho made up a story saying that Sung-hin died of a heart attack. As it turned out, Byung-gap was the one who had given Jae-ho the information about Hyunsu. He was the first to know that Hyunsu was a police officer on an undercover mission. However, Jae-ho did not believe what Byung-gap told him, especially since Hyunsu was the one who had saved his life. From then on, Jae-ho devised a plan to get Hyunsu on his side, and he promised to kill Hyunsu if his plan failed. Jae-ho started his plan by planning a hit-and-run accident that ended up killing Hyunsu's mother. With his mother dead, Hyunsu would surely contact his boss, Insuk, to ask for permission to leave prison. When Hyunsu didn't get permission from Insuk, that's when Jae-ho would bribe the police to give Hyunsu permission. This was how he could gain trust and eventually make Hyunsu his loyal follower. From the CCTV footage, it finally opened Hyunsu's eyes. All this time, he had trusted the wrong person. The story then returns to the next timeline. On that day, the gang members gathered to celebrate Jae-ho as the new gang leader. A little while later, he got a call from Hyun-soo saying that the police were going to investigate their gang. Hyun-soo said that he had been framed and that someone might have discovered his identity as a police officer. To save his life, Jae-ho had to hand over all the drugs he had to the police. Jae-ho suspected that the person who framed Hyun-soo was Byung-gap because he was the only person who knew Hyun-soo's true identity. Jae-ho's suspicions grew stronger too, as he knew that Byung-gap didn't like Hyun-soo. Jae-ho didn't realize that Hyun-soo and the police were playing tricks on him. In-suk was sure that, as Jae-ho's confidant, he would do anything to save Hyun-soo. Later that night, Jae-ho called Byung-gap to meet him. While waiting for Jae-ho's arrival, Byung-gap sat at Jae-ho's table and acted as if he were the ruler of all the mafia groups. A few moments later, Jae-ho arrived, and without first listening to Byung-gap's explanation, he mercilessly beat Byung-gap to death. After that, Jae-ho prepared all the drugs he had, and he then went to a place determined by the police to exchange Hyun-soo and the drugs. When he arrived at the location, Jae-ho found many oddities, and he finally realized that he had been framed. Hyun-soo then said that all this time, Jae-ho had been running his business the wrong way. Jae-ho had killed everyone he disliked, from his competitor, Byung-chul, to Byung-gap, who was loyal to him, to Hyun-soo's mother. Jae-ho then pointed his gun at Hyun-soo, as he no longer trusted him. However, Jae-ho could not kill him because he was so fond of Hyun-soo, who had also saved his life. A few moments later, the police began to fill the place, and a shootout ensued. Hyun-soo, who intended to help the police, became the target of one of his police colleagues. When Jae-ho saw Hyun-soo being betrayed by his partner, Jae-ho came to save him. After being saved by Jae-ho, Hyun-soo then asked Jae-ho to kill him, otherwise it would be him who would kill Jae-ho. However, Jae-ho still let Hyun-soo live by only shooting his ear. Jae-ho then walked away while crying over his memories with Hyun-soo. All of a sudden, he was hit by In-suk. In-suk then took Jae-ho's car keys from his shirt pocket, and she checked the drugs that Jae-ho kept in his car. After making sure the drugs were intact in Jae-ho's car, In-suk got ready to leave. But unexpectedly, Hyun-soo came and shot her. Hyun-soo then walked over to Jae-ho and put the gun he had used to shoot In-suk in Jae-ho's hand. Hyun-soo then killed him by tightly covering Jae-ho's nose, and he was the only person who survived the chaos. At the end of the story, Hyun-soo stared at the sky with an empty look.